Tonight, flattening the curve and shortening the Centrelink queues, the government's latest plan to keep people in work. Also tonight, three's a crowd. Victorian police to issue on-the-spot fines for anyone caught breaking the rules.
If you're having friends over for dinner or friends over for drinks that are not members of your household, then you are breaking the law.
Visitors not welcome. Victoria's holiday hotspots asking non-residents to stay away. And enjoying a wine tasting tour of the Barossa Valley without leaving the couch. Good evening, Tamara Oudyn with ABC News. The Prime Minister has launched a record $130 billion package to try to preserve the jobs of up to 6 million workers. It's by far the biggest single spending program ever committed, and it'll be spent in just 6 months. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
Australia's seen nothing like it.
Now is the time to dig deep. Governments making decisions like they never have before.
An astonishing third economic rescue package, upping the defences against a crisis that confounds like no other before.
We are committing $130 billion over the next 6 months to support the jobs and livelihoods of what we anticipate of being almost 6 million Australians.
That's $5 billion a week to be spent tackling a jobs killer, one that's already seen hundreds of thousands of Australians join Centrelink queues. The $1,500 a fortnight JobKeeper allowance will be payable to full-time, part-time and casuals who've been on the books for more than a year. That's up to 6 million Australians, or nearly half the working population. Small and medium-sized businesses who've lost more than 30% of turnover will be eligible. For businesses with turnovers of $1 billion or more, they'll be eligible if their turnover has dropped by 50% or more. It's backdated to the 1st of March, meaning many of those made redundant in the past few weeks might get the payment.
So if you're an employer who's been forced as a result of the downturn following the coronavirus to retrench workers, you'll put them back on your books and you'll receive this $1,500 payment.
Employees won't be going to Centrelink. They won't be engaging with the social security system. They'll be engaging directly with their employer, and their employer will be making the payments.
For this struggling golf club in Brisbane, it hits the spot.
Oh, that would help us big time because we'd be enabled to keep our full-time staff.
The club's lost 80% of business and had to lay off 3 full-time workers and all the casuals.
And I'm on edge if I'll have an income and places to go afterwards, but that should keep everyone rolling and happy.
In throwing a gobsmacking amount of money at the coronavirus crisis, the government's so-called hibernation strategy is taking shape. At enormous cost, it wants the Australian workforce to spring back to life as soon as the virus threat lifts, whenever that is. The stakes couldn't be higher. The Prime Minister grimly predicts this crisis will bankrupt some nations and cause others to collapse altogether. He's determined to make sure Australia isn't one of them. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
And National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett joins me now from Parliament House. Greg, we've not seen spending on this scale this quickly before. Will it do what it's meant to?
Well, that's just the thing, Tamara. We don't know. So there are, to be fair, some pretty solid designs here that put that obligation on employers to keep workers on their books. But no one can guarantee that most people who had a job before the 1st of March will have it back again in September. I guess that's just the nature of the times that we're living in. But here's what this package does tell us, Tamara. No government has ever committed $130 billion to any one-off 6-month program since Federation. It's worth more than a fifth of an entire normal budget spending for a normal year. So its enormity only really confirms the gravity of the situation here. And there is a reason, perhaps, why Scott Morrison, these are his words, is hoping and praying that no government ever has to launch this sort of rescue again, because on these sorts of numbers, it's hard to imagine that a repeat dose could actually be afforded, which, Tamara, is kind of why it needs to work too.
Greg Jennett in Canberra, thank you very much. Well, with stage 3 restrictions about to come into force, Victorians can expect on-the-spot fines if they're caught flouting the new rules. The revised limits on public gatherings, now down to 2 people, will kick in from midnight. That limit doesn't apply to people within your own household, if you have to be at work or if you need to go out to buy food or essentials or see a doctor. And the government wants those over 70 to stay at home. 18 people have died from the virus in Australia. 17 of them were over 70 and the other was a man in his 60s. The total number of coronavirus cases in Victoria now exceeds 800. Here's state political reporter Bridget Rollison.
2's company, but 3's a crowd. And anyone flouting the new rules can be slapped with a $1,600 on-the-spot fine.
The message is very simple. Stay at home or people will die.
Stage 3 restrictions start from midnight. Gatherings of more than 2 people are banned unless it's members of the same household.
There are 4 reasons to leave your home: to get medical care, to go to work, for your daily exercise, and to go and buy the things you need when you need them, not to be window shopping.
Playgrounds around the state are now closed, and the Premier has confirmed renters can't be evicted from their properties for the next 6 months. The Chief Health Officer says if all the rules are heeded, the virus can be contained.
Now, when levels are relatively low, is a point where we can totally flatten that curve. We could cap cases in Australia at 10 to 15,000. The alternative is hundreds of thousands.
Another 56 cases were confirmed overnight, taking the state's tally to 821. 4 people have died, 29 are in hospital, and 4 of those are in intensive care. 248 people have recovered. As the numbers mount, the government is continuing to boost capacity in hospitals around the state. Hundreds of nurses are being retrained for the peak of the pandemic.
We have almost 800 nurses who have contacted us wanting to come back and assist their colleagues across the state.
The government has also struck a deal with private hospitals to care for more coronavirus patients.
We've got the option of expanding up to 60 intensive care beds if we need to.
It seems the government has more work to do in regional areas, though, where there are reports of lengthy waits for COVID-19 test results.
Last week we heard of reports from as close as Ballarat that are taking anything up to 8 days to get a turnaround on a test.
This morning, more international travellers were bussed to city hotels to begin their 14-day quarantine.
They are treating us like a princess and I am receiving good food.
The Premier says he'll call an emergency sitting of State Parliament before the end of the financial year to pass supply bills so nurses, police and other public servants can continue to get paid. But as to what's next for Victoria, well, the Premier says he can't rule out a 4th stage of restrictions.
So long as we see people doing the wrong thing, for so long as we see additional cases each day, then we're going to have to consider taking next steps.
Just what those next steps are remains to be seen. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
The rules may be simple according to the Premier, but there are mixed messages coming from different levels of government. Daniel Andrews says people can self-isolate in a holiday home as long as they follow the rules. But some councils along Victoria's coastline say they've been swamped and they want people to stay away. Peter Lusted reports.
In troubled times, many people are heading for calmer waters on Victoria's coast, but the message for visitors is not so tranquil.
If you can stay at home, stay at home. So it's been disappointing to see an influx of visitors into Bass Coast Shire Council.
The Bass Coast population of 37,000 swelled to 150,000 on the weekend. Some visitors have booked homes for 2 months on Phillip Island, while other Airbnb providers have openly targeted people arriving from overseas.
Airbnb and other accommodation providers were offering self-isolation packages for up to 14 days, and that's how they were targeting those particular groups, people returning from overseas.
Health officials in the area say they don't have the facilities to handle the extra people.
Very concerned that the hospital system will not be able to cope.
Across the coast, locals are angry with visitors putting them at risk. There are 45 cases on the Mornington Peninsula, making it the second worst affected local government area in Victoria, while the anger is palpable on the Surf Coast too.
They were sitting on the beach in large groups. Thousands of cars were everywhere. I was receiving complaints from everywhere, from Lorne to Anglesey, Torquay through to Ocean Grove.
Drastic measures are being proposed.
If things don't change along the Great Ocean Road and in our coastal communities, I believe that the Great Ocean Road will have to be closed to visitors.
Holiday home owners like Chris Plummer-Lowers at Phillip Island aren't happy they're being told to leave by council.
The fact that I pay rates here should entitle me to stay here whenever I want, but I can see the council's sort of concern.
The Premier says they can stay, but should think of others.
I would ask people to be as considerate as they can be of smaller regional communities, smaller coastal communities where there might not be, the sort of supermarket of size. Everyone needs to be considerate of each other.
Choppy waters for locals and visitors. Peter Lusted, ABC News, Melbourne.
There are encouraging signs that Australia's strategy to slow down the growth in new coronavirus cases may be having an impact. Here's Casey Briggs.
There are now more than 4,200 confirmed coronavirus cases in Australia. 1,918 of them, almost half, are in New South Wales. It's been a relatively slow day of growth in cases. New South Wales today recorded its smallest daily jump since last Sunday. South Australia, only 6 new cases today, its smallest rise in more than a week and a half. That could be a very good sign. It could show that social distancing measures are starting to work. But there are lots of caveats. The number of cases that you find partly depends on the amount of testing you do. Is there local community transmission going on that we just don't know about? We also today learned of 2 new deaths, the first for the ACT and the first for Tasmania, bringing the total across Australia to 18. Globally, more than 720,000 cases of coronavirus have been confirmed. A fifth of those, 143,000, are in the US. And just one country to keep an eye on as the days progress is Turkey. Less than 10,000 cases at the moment, but they've got there faster than any other country. The trajectory of that country's outbreak is the steepest in the world.
Everyone will now be able to access a GP and many other kinds of health experts by phone or video. It's called Telehealth, and it's designed to keep patients out of clinics and to preserve supplies of protective equipment. Here's medical reporter Sophie Scott.
I've got a bit of a cough, which is a bit concerning for me.
In a major shake-up to healthcare, patients can now video call or phone their doctors for a consultation.
This will make a huge difference.
You've got all your medications. The virtual visits will be bulk billed, eliminating any out-of-pocket costs.
How popular do you think telehealth will be with Australian patients?
I'm expecting that 80 or 90% of my consultations will be by telehealth.
The move means waiting rooms will be a lot less crowded, which experts hope will slow the spread of the virus.
2.8 million Australians visit their GP every week. We can't have a situation where the majority of the country puts their primary care on hold.
So we're learning, and so are our patients who haven't ever had to do that before.
As well as GPs, patients can have telehealth consultations with psychologists and psychiatrists, nurses and midwives, paediatricians and other experts for kids with developmental delays. Measures are also in place for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health assessments, people with eating disorders and people in aged care. The move away from face-to-face consultations will protect patients and staff and save precious supplies of masks.
There are obviously cases in various parts of the country where that supply is wafer thin and very much at an extremely short supply level.
If telehealth isn't for you, that's okay. Clinics will still be open for face-to-face consultations for medical problems that can't be treated over the phone.
So it's day 4.
The changes mean those who need to stay home can and still get the medical care they need. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
Just how many people have had the virus or are carrying it with no symptoms is still an unknown. But soon, rapid test kits will be available across the country. They'll return results in minutes and show whether the patient has coronavirus antibodies.
Testing for COVID-19 could be as simple as this, a prick to the finger. It is a common way of assessing diabetics, and a similar type of test will soon be available to check for coronavirus antibodies, proof someone has had the disease. Australian biotechnology company CellMid expects its first shipment of rapid testing kits from China to arrive next month.
The way it works is that there are two little receptacles here and here, and you basically put blood in one and you put the reagent that you get with the kit with the other, and you put it down on a table, and it develops over a period of anywhere between 3 to 15 minutes.
The University of Technology Sydney is also working on an improved version of the current test. It would ideally give a result in less than an hour and would cost about $10.
What we are trying to shrink all these multi-stage scenarios to a single home-based type test similar to the pregnancy test.
He says the different types of tests won't compete against each other and that testing should eventually be expanded to more Australians.
The more information, as I said, get generated, the more tests get done, the better position we are in for the future development or even recurrence of this disease.
The Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, says rapid testing is not the gold standard.
In the acute setting where someone is sick with this virus, actually those tests have a very limited capability to test whether people do indeed have the virus or not.
But for those wanting a test, options are on the way. Kathleen Ferguson, ABC News, Sydney.
Still to come this hour, the human face of Australia's jobs crisis.
One day everything was as normal, and then the next day, that's it, we had to shut. I am quite worried about the next 6 to 12 months.
It was one of the hardest days of my life. We were fighting so hard to give them jobs to do.
Also, Dr. Norman Swan reports from his own self-isolation. That's coming up.
For the first time since the Second World War, Britain is on an emergency footing. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is trying to prevent the outbreak in his country getting as bad as Italy. 11,000 Italians have died and almost 100,000 have been infected. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports.
Italian police salute a convoy of army vehicles transporting bodies. Another day, another 756 people die. The grim toll is now nearing 11,000. In Naples, a priest leads mass from the roof of a church. The neighbourhood congregation gathers on balconies to pray.
In Cristo Gesù nostro Signore. Amen.
Police deploy their eye in the sky to check on people disobeying the lockdown. And on the ground, the police are also deploying water cannons, normally used to disperse protesters, but now to sanitise the streets. 250,000 face masks are flown into Venice, where the health system is collapsing under the strain. So many doctors and nurses have been infected. The government is appealing to healthcare workers to travel to the north and help. More than 50 doctors have died, and at least 4,000 nurses have the virus.
The north is still in a deep crisis. We have a shortage of specialized people in health sector because they have been contaminated.
15% of Spain's medical professionals are ill with COVID-19. The country's just recorded a new daily record of 838 deaths, taking the death toll there to over 6,500.
Britain is now on an emergency footing, with special coordination centres being set up across the country and the military being deployed. Boris Johnson has warned things will get worse before they get better, and it could be up to 6 months before things start to return to normal. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
About 400 Australians stuck in India have called on the federal government to get them home amid fears for their safety. A tough nationwide lockdown has been declared, which police are brutally enforcing. South Asia correspondent James Oudyn reports.
Casper Simonson's near empty hotel has been his refuge for a week.
So essentially, from what you can see there to this gate here, that's sort of as much free rein as we get.
The streets outside the hotel's gates in the South Indian city of Pondicherry are empty. Grocery stores and pharmacies are meant to stay open, but the Queenslander is afraid to go out.
The lockdown is enforced very, very heavily by the police here, so there's been many reports of people getting caned and beaten with batons for breaking lockdown procedures.
Videos of overzealous police striking and degrading alleged lockdown breakers have featured heavily in local media. So too has Vision showing thousands of migrant workers massing near transport terminals and state borders, desperate to get to their hometowns and villages.
This is the view from our hotel room.
Australians stuck in hotel rooms have noticed a shift in community anxiety.
And it changes rapidly, which is a scary part.
We will be seen as disease and virus spreaders.
Morning, my name is Navin.
Navin Chitator arrived in Chennai to visit his family more than 2 weeks ago. Just a few days ago, something changed.
Quarantine label on my house.
Now his family's struggling to get food delivered.
Milk is the main thing, it's been cut off. And since my brother's wife, she's pregnant, 6 months pregnant, and she needs to take her nutrition every day.
The Prime Minister Narendra Modi has apologised for the hardship this 3-week lockdown has caused, particularly for the nation's poor. But he's doubled down on the aggressive measures, saying they're necessary to win the war against coronavirus. James Oudyn, ABC News, New Delhi.
US President Donald Trump has extended the US shutdown until the end of April after health officials warned the pandemic could claim 100,000 to 200,000 lives. New York City is still the epicentre where residents in lockdown clapped and cheered healthcare workers. The mayor says they'll be out of hospital supplies in a week without reinforcements. As the number of cases rises, the president backed down from his earlier suggestions that the national guidelines would be relaxed by Easter.
The better you do, the faster this whole nightmare will end. Therefore, we will be extending our guidelines to April 30th to slow the spread.
Health experts warn America is likely to hit the peak of the pandemic in 2 weeks with millions of infections. The number currently stands at more than 140,000, which is the highest in the world. 3 crew members thought to have COVID-19 have been transferred from the Ruby Princess cruise ship to a Sydney hospital. Water police, a doctor and 4 paramedics were involved in the boat-to-boat transfer off Sydney's Botany Bay. The Ruby Princess was at the centre of a political storm earlier this month when nearly 3,000 passengers were allowed to disembark in Sydney despite several tests pending. There are now 189 confirmed cases from that ship. The big fiscal support package announced this afternoon lifted the local share market today to its biggest rise this year. Here's Alan Kohler.
In fact, it was the biggest one-day rise in years, 6.6%, turbocharged in the last half an hour after the $130 billion stimulus package, number 3, was announced. It was led by the banks, with Commonwealth jumping a remarkable 11% and Westpac 8.5%. A couple of other notable rises. Ansell, which reported that surgical gloves and other protective gear are selling like hot cakes, and the market went, oh yeah, rubber gloves, and bid the stock up 25%. Also, Regional Express jumped after the rescue package for regional airlines that was announced on the weekend. Now, there weren't many falls today, but investors are still worried about shopping centres like Scentre Group. And here's why. Foot traffic has collapsed, and that's before the government started imposing lockdowns. In general, there have been 158 guidance updates from ASX 200 companies this month, of which 122 or 77% simply withdrew the previous guidance because they're flying blind now. Today's rise here came despite falls everywhere else in the world, including around 3% in New York and Tokyo. And by the way, an interesting problem has come up in the United States share market. Zoom has become a popular platform for business meetings and socialising, so naturally their shares have become popular too. But confusingly, there are 2 companies called Zoom. And the other one is a defunct company based in China and makes no money. But a lot of people have been buying the wrong one by mistake. The oil price fell again, so did iron ore and copper, and the Australian dollar stayed roughly steady at around 61.5 US cents. And that's finance.
The AFL has secured a line of credit from both NAB and ANZ Bank as it navigates the COVID-19 crisis. The ABC understands it's secured loans of more than $500 million to try to save all 18 clubs from financial ruin. Despite the cash lifeline, AFL boss Gillon McLachlan warned the code is still facing losses of hundreds of millions of dollars this year. The league suspended its season after round 1, and it's unclear when it will resume. Rugby Australia CEO Raylene Castle will take a 50% pay cut as the code battles to stay afloat. At this morning's AGM, the governing body announced a deficit of more than $9 million. A multi-million-dollar payout to Israel Folau contributed to the sport's dismal financial position. The Rugby Union Players Association says it's been locked out of the process to decide the future of the game.
I understand from their point of view there's a level of frustration that they haven't had a deep engagement earlier. The reality is I didn't want, and Rugby Australia felt the most important thing was to enter those conversations with a chance to give them accurate information.
Rugby Australia will meet with the Players Association tomorrow to discuss a pay cut for players. 40% of Racing Victoria's permanent staff will be temporarily stood down or work reduced hours as that industry battles to stay financially healthy. Racing is still going ahead, but without crowds. Racing Victoria is also planning to slash prize money for metropolitan and country races. Well, like so many of life's pleasures at the moment, going on a wine tasting tour is off limits because of the coronavirus. But one Barossa Valley winery has found an innovative way to make sure eager customers don't miss out. It's set up virtual tastings, helping those with a glass at home connect with the wine.
Speaking of that, I've got an empty glass, so I'm just going to have a top up right now.
Organise a time and a place with a few of us and, get together apart, sit down, nothing too technical, but get a bit of community back.
The online service is timely because all South Australian wineries will tonight be forced to close their doors due to a local outbreak of the virus. To the weather now. Here's Paul Higgins.
And temps are beginning to look quite autumnal over parts of Victoria as we head towards the end of March. Beautiful sight up there at Mount Macedon, but we haven't had too many of those crisp autumn mornings just yet. Mount William was coolest with a low of 6. Some light showers in our southwest today and some thunderstorms up here in our northeast corner. Otherwise, it's been a dry and mildish day. Albury, Wodonga, Wangaratta and Yarrawonga were warmest, reaching 27. Here in Melbourne, we got to 21.7 at 4:21 this afternoon, 23 in Geelong and on the Surf Coast, and right now outside the front door it's 19 degrees. Showers today in Canberra, Sydney and Cairns, a hot one up in Darwin, in fact just 0.1 of a degree off a March record up there. A weak cold front has been crossing southern Victoria and Tasmania today, thunderstorms to the north of us with a pressure trough. Now tomorrow and Wednesday will be under this ridge of high pressure. But on Wednesday, an upper level low will be near northern Victoria, and on Thursday it'll be over our east. So later on Wednesday, showers will start to spread down into our north, and then on Thursday, much of the eastern half of the state will have showers and thunderstorms and a humid day. Tomorrow, Sydney and Brisbane could get an afternoon shower or two. In Perth, mostly sunny. Adelaide, Hobart and Canberra will all be partly cloudy. Back home, patches of fog in the morning, mostly in the south and over the northeast. Some light showers in the morning near the coast and over the East Gippsland Ranges. Partly cloudy in the south, but sunny once again in our north. A westerly on the bays at 10 to 15 knots, becoming variable at 10 knots during the morning. Well, down to 13 in Melbourne tonight and a high of 22 tomorrow. We'll have some patches of fog about the hills early in the morning, otherwise a partly cloudy end to March with a light and variable wind blowing. For April Fool's Day Wednesday, early fog, then a mostly sunny 23. Thursday, a few showers, 3 to 10 millimetres of rain in the city, but less than out west, 21. Friday is the warmest day in the forecast, up to 25 because of a north wind. Then some afternoon and evening showers and possibly a thunderstorm, 3 to 6 millimetres of rain. And a cool and windy weekend. Showers Saturday, 3 to 8 millimetres. Sunday, just 15 with late showers, and more showers Monday and a high of 18, Tam.
Thank you, Paul. Stay with us. Lee Sales is up next.